You are listening to the Foreign Policy Focus podcast.
We cannot wait for the final proof. The smoking gun could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Haven't you driven enough people from their homes already? Bulldoze their villages, seize their property and their laws. They had no part in making it.
Now working in Libya with friends and allies, we've demonstrated what collective action can achieve in the 21st century.
Now the host of the show, Kyle Ansel.
This is episode 399 of the Foreign Policy Focus podcast. Today's show is actually about a week old. For a couple of reasons, I ended up holding the show mostly because I had planned interviews with Scott Hortney and Joanne Leone, who appeared on the last two episodes of the show. Joanne's episode was a swapcast, so we were both releasing it on the same day. And Scott's interview I wanted to drop right as he released his new book, The Great Ron Paul, Scott Horton Show Interviews, 2004 to 2019, which all of you should go to the libertarianinstitute.org and buy that great book. So anyways, today's interview, I actually recorded on 9/11. And like last year, I wanted to keep with what I feel like is the unique perspective that I have on 9/11 to talk about the attacks and then the afterwards terror war and what it was like to grow up during that time. And so this year I brought on Phil Gibson to talk about that with me. Phil is the host of A Boy Named Pseu podcast. That's Pseu. And he's also doing some work now over at the Libertarian Institute, which is, of course, where you're going to find this show and the daily news roundup that I write in the right-hand column of the homepage there. Phil's show, A Boy Named Pseu, again, often is found on the blog section there. So again, right-hand column of the homepage there, you got the blog. So Scott's usually posting some great stuff on there. Phil's show and other great content. All right. So again, I said I had to reword the introduction. So it may sound a little clunky, but I'm just going to pick it up where I asked Phil to talk a little bit about a show so he could introduce himself to my audience. So here we go with the show.
Yeah, I do have a show of my own. It is A Boy Named Pseu, where I cover a variety of topics, libertarian-based, voluntarist, anti-war, Austrian economics. I've got a lot of great guests that come on, and I do a Pseu News, as I like to call a weekly roundup. And yeah, I've been doing that since January, and foreign policy is really the issue that people not only as libertarians should be aware of, but really on any side of the political spectrum, for better or for worse. It is kind of the thing that really kind of moves this country forward, because it seems everyone's business has to be our business. And if you're going to speak on it, you kind of have to know what you're talking about. So I try to do the very best on that. But, yeah, that's my story for now, and I'm sticking to it.
But I did, think me and Phil will have an interesting perspective on 9/11 today, as, we were both in, I guess, elementary school, if, he was even that far along at the time. And it's just so crazy how scared everybody was looking back at it now, and especially, now being within the anti-war movement and understanding that so much of what was the scariest was actually just straight out lies. So, Phil, fill us in as much detail, as you want about, you don't have to tell your 9/11 story necessarily, but just kind of, what was going on kind of at the time for you, and then kind of the immediate aftermath, what thoughts and, opinions are, if, you're even old enough to have opinions you had about what happened there.
Dude, probably no thoughts since I was in, first grade when it happened. And it was just over my head. Like, yeah, something far away from me happened. And after that, more stuff far away from me happened, but apparently it was my country causing the chaos in the first place. So I was really kind of apolitical in general. I mean, I come from the right, and I voted that way just because I didn't want, high taxes and stuff, but it doesn't mean I didn't care about people. But that aside the point, I feel like I was just annoyed and desensitized by just the constant 24-hour mainstream news cycle. For whatever reason, your parents got to have Fox News on or talk radio just to like fill the void, maybe not even pay attention to it. And I just got annoyed. And like when you're growing up as a kid, you don't pay attention. You don't know anything about foreign policy. And the majority of Americans carry that on with them, and they just focus on them, which I think is, you could argue, people are inherently liberty-minded, self-interested, but not not selfish. And they're just focusing on them and in the then and now, on their career, their families, this and that, and they don't have time to study about what's happening in Iraq. They don't have time to understand Sunni versus Shia, why we're on the Sunni side, but then are supporting the Shia side as we're trying to take out Saddam, and how all that blowback just kind of cascades down, explodes in our face, and really it's all because of the self-licking ice cream cone that is American imperialism and the military-industrial complex. So no one wants to invest the time and waste their brain power in really focusing on what is going on. And that was pretty much me up until, if I'll be honest, like this year, not this year, but like a year or over a year. So yeah, I really didn't start caring about foreign policy until I got deep into voluntarism, libertarianism, anarchism, and all that. So I don't blame people for already kind of being desensitized about it, because it's all you kind of hear. And as scary as it may have been back then, it's just pitiful how their efforts just, they fall flat on their face on the media. And it's very interesting how seeing the left, in quotes, left, because they're not the real left. I mean, you and I both know who the real good leftists are on the war issue, Kyle. But it's just funny how the mainstream media left are turning into the war hawks, or maybe the war hawks they've always been. You know, maybe Hillary Clinton was like giving them funny money under the table, and on those Benjamins she wrote hawkish propaganda. I don't know, but honestly, it's sad to say that not enough people really do care about foreign policy, and how it really just comes back to bite you in the butt on the home front, because we're the ones paying for it. So, yeah, that's my first thought on 9/11. I guess. I mean, I have more on like how it started and stuff, but
a couple interesting things, and I've talked to other people around our age on the show about this, which was, I never remember anybody ever showing me a picture of an Afghan, a map of Afghanistan, or especially in school. I went through public school system. And so, nobody ever talked about the wars going on at all, or tried to take, what was going on with 9/11 and then, the reaction to it, and ever talk about it in the schools, unless it was kind of like, learning like a slogan, you see something, say something, or, recognizing threats, or something like that maybe was talked about a little bit. But generally, the wars were never talked about. I was just wondering if that was similar with your experience or not.
Yeah, no, there's like bad, evil brown people that want to kill us. That's pretty much what I got out of it. Like, other than that was pretty much it. Conflating right. Saddam Hussein versus Osama bin Laden, they're the same people. They're brown over there, and they hate us because we're free and all that crap. And Bush can do no wrong.
I just think about from the perspective of me being a child, just kind of absorbing what people were saying around me. I thought that every single person the U.S. was killing in Afghanistan looked like Osama bin Laden. It wasn't until years later that anybody ever showed like a picture of an Afghani person, and you realize that, oh, those people don't even look like that guy. You know what I mean? Like, I pictured a bunch of people walking around with, the big turbans on their heads and, kind of, and that's what I thought of it, because, nobody took the time to say like, oh, hey, there's actually a country there. What an interesting point that Scott Horton makes about 9/11. And I just wanted to talk about this because there's actually a great video up today of an interview process that I think you were actually a part of, Phil. And so I'll link to that in the show notes page. So everybody should go watch Scott Horton talking about why bin Laden carried out the attack on 9/11. But he's pointed out that, bin Laden didn't do the 9/11 attacks to scared the Americans out of the Middle East, but rather to, just basically wreck the ship of the American empire on the mountains of Afghanistan. And do you know what that means? That bin Laden did not care about the Afghan people. He wasn't doing it on behalf of them. He was doing it on behalf of his own, radical ideological, movement that, he had invented for himself as being the most important thing in the world, to take out the American empire. And, for his religious beliefs, however the hell they were tied into that. And so, never anybody really pointing out or realizing that the Afghan people were really victims of this whole thing. Osama bin Laden wasn't there, certainly all because of even the Taliban. The U.S. hell is just as responsible for him hiding out there as anywhere else. So, that's an interesting part of the whole thing. And yeah, just the lack of education that, happened around it. I also had a very interesting conversation with a teacher recently, and I just brought that up, kind of to see what she would say. And I didn't want to make it a confrontational thing. I just wanted to make it like interested to see if she talked to her students about it. And the reply she gave was, well, of course not. It wasn't in the curriculum yet. And so it's, I think, just, such a great libertarian point to have made. That the children growing up after 9/11 and the terror wars and everything didn't learn anything about the country that, their country was at war with, because the bureaucracy moves slow. And what, you're going to put a curriculum together before you could, put the war in the history book? That's ridiculous. And so it makes it really seem like America isn't in war, because, you're learning about the big battles of World War II. And, well, George Bush is just bombing some mountains in Afghanistan. That was in a lot of ways my perspective of the whole thing.
God, it kills me to wonder what that curriculum looks like. Because they actually started teaching this to new recruits into the military of why we're all here and what happened at 9/11. So I just hate to see what kind of propaganda that looks like.
Right. Well, and so, me and you are at least old enough to remember that 9/11 happened. But, we have to realize that now there's children entering the military that don't. That, many of them, 2, 3, 4 years old probably don't remember it at all. And so, they could have been serving for the past, 4 years. But now, literally, people born after 9/11 and very soon after the start of the Afghan war will be, serving towards the duty in Afghanistan. Yeah, not that many years ago. Well, I guess it, probably was even up to 8 years ago or whenever the Onion started. They would run these articles that say like, son takes over father's patrol route in Afghanistan. And it's supposed to be satire, but, we're not that far from that reality at this point.
Yeah, no, it's really, it's bizarre of just the stakes that we can cause just innocent people in a different country to actually go. Like, that's how bad the turmoil is that we cause. So, yeah, I'm sure they don't teach that in the curriculum.
Yeah, so I guess I do want to talk a little bit about the Afghan war today, just because it was the immediate consequence of the 9/11 terror attacks. And, the biggest point to make, I think I already made, was that, it wasn't Afghanistan that attacked the United States. It was Osama bin Laden and his jihadists. And, other important points here are that, these 9/11 attacks weren't planned uniquely in Afghanistan. It was always made to sound like there was something unique about Afghanistan that allowed Osama bin Laden and his gang of murderers to live in Afghanistan and carry out this war. But in reality, it was planned also in Germany and in the United States. And was the other one? Malaysia, I think there's a famous meeting. So, there's plenty of other places that are just, as responsible as Afghanistan as a nation as a whole, for hosting or allowing the talks to happen. Of course, it is in no way the responsibility or the problem of an American or a person of Afghanistan that, bin Laden was planning some kind of attacks in their country. There's a lot of evidence, and Scott Horn does a great job in the first chapter of Fool's Errand, or this may be actually the second chapter of that book, that the Taliban weren't all that happy with bin Laden. That, I think if the Americans and Bill Clinton really picked up on the signals that they were laying down, the Americans could have taken out bin Laden at various points. We know that Bill Clinton had the opportunity to take out bin Laden at various points before, he left office. So this was all before 9/11. And even after the attacks, there were options other than invading Afghanistan, including allowing the Taliban to turn bin Laden over to a third country, or to just present the Taliban with evidence that he was actually guilty of the crime. So, it didn't have to be that we have the Afghan war after, 9/11. There were ways around it, but the warlust at the time, the hatred, the nationalism that was stirred up, and it was directed at bin Laden, and bin Laden happened to be located in Afghanistan. So we took out the whole country with him. I believe it's Daniel L. Davis, but there's a Daniel P. Davis too. Now, I hope I'm not getting the wrong one. But he, pointed out that if the mission was to defeat the Taliban, that was accomplished by 2002. So that, if, you say that, well, we did have to do something after 9/11 because of your war hawkish reasons. Well, then, certainly once the Taliban were defeated, that should have been enough. But, it wasn't. And we continued the war and the nation building efforts from there on out. I read an interesting quote today, I believe from Laura Bush, that says something like, we're going to Afghanistan to make the country safe for women. It would be nice, I would say, if the Afghan women would have equality with the men. But there's absolutely nothing that dropping U.S. High explosives on Afghanistan has done in the past 18 years that has made Afghan women safe. Many Afghan women have died, innocent victims because of the war started here by the United States. Maybe some in the terrorist attacks by the Taliban and others by U.S.-made bombs. We know in this past year, the U.S. has been responsible for more civilian deaths than the Taliban. Well, the U.S. with our proxy force, the Afghan government army. In that time of trying to build a government in Afghanistan, so, think 2002 and on, 17 years, we haven't been able to do so. The government there, everybody knows that if the U.S. left, it wouldn't last a few, maybe months before the Taliban overran and took Kabul. It wouldn't take very long. Nobody believes that government can stand on its own because all the cash coming into that government is from the United States, is overloaded with corruption. Nothing gets done. There's constantly warlords who are, guilty of war crimes like Hekmatyar, now running for the presidency because somehow democracy is going to, break out in Afghanistan. Anytime they try to have an election there, there's just rampant violence against the polling places. Now there's an ISIS affiliate in that country, and that's actually not necessarily because the U.S. has been bombing Afghanistan for the past 18 years, although I'm sure, creating power vacuums in different areas of the country didn't help the situation, but it's actually blowback from Barack Obama's drone war and support for the Pakistani army in their military engagement against the Trinki Taliban in Pakistan. This group is actually the enemy of the Afghan Taliban and is now fighting them there. So, maybe if Trump dreamed up an Obama situation and play out the Syria playbook, he would actually just try to pit the terrorists against each other, or the terrorists against the Taliban. So, we're getting, I guess now pretty close to caught up on this war that's been going on for 18 years. The U.S. has been trying to build a government, trying to establish, rights for everybody, and has failed miserably. And so now the situation is that Trump has been in somewhat of peace negotiations for the past year or so. Of course, when he took over, there's about 8,000 troops in Afghanistan. His initial, security team convinces him to increase the number of troops to close to 15,000. So he has a little mini surge, much like Obama had a surge when he entered office in Afghanistan. And of course, it doesn't change anything on the ground. As Danny Surgeon points out, he is a former U.S. major who is a veteran of the Afghan surge. The Taliban will be there, were there before we got there, and they'll be there after we leave, and 100,000 troops in that country could not secure it. And so the surge was an absolute failure, and Thanks now we have the great writings of Janie Surgeon at places like antiwar.com, to tell us about why that war is awful and why we need to end it. And so, bringing us up to the peace talks, Trump was engaging them, but we find out now that, they're only talking about withdrawing 5,000 troops. So just getting the number back to the start of the Trump administration. And, it doesn't seem like they're going to amount to anything at this point. So it looks like just more of the same in Afghanistan for the years to come, even though it's been so long and such a failure.
Yeah, it's just really sad how they don't learn the whole, learn from history. This is blowback that they're just giving themselves jobs to do. I mean, I think imperialism is like the world's greatest job program that's out there. And you've got to remember, no, yeah, that's right. Like, I'm sorry, Tim Ryan or whoever the hell messed it up with Tulsi. But no, the Taliban did not bomb our towers. It was Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is the one and only enemy to the United States, if there is one. But again, that's the United States' fault in the first place. So again, you come full circle in creating your own problems or just, setting your own fires to go put out later. And it doesn't matter what country it's in, because that's how empires are. You start one country, you move to the next, and there's no starting or moving or ending when it comes to Afghanistan, because it's just like a black hole. It's a black box. This is where empires go to die. And honestly, we didn't need to be there in the first place. And I don't know if it's just to get that much closer to check China and Russia or, whatever. But, I mean, Scott Horton says it best. We just got to end it. Call it off. Come home. Whatever. Just stop. There's no winning this. And and unfortunately, like every time I hear that there's talks of a peace talk, I just shrug it off, because that's where I'm at this point. And maybe we can be a bit more optimistic, because it's one of the reasons Trump fired Bolton, because, he was ready to have negotiations, and then here comes Bolton mustache yapping away saying we can't. So I don't know, but still, whoever replaces him, I really don't think the commander-in-chief can really have much say in kind of what we do and don't do in these countries, because, as you said, sure, he'll pull out troops, but that's the troops that we started with in the beginning. So now we're just like at some neutral level of nothing. It's just the way government bureaucracy moves. It moves slow or not at all. So
right. Well, and this is coming from the guy who has been calling the Afghan war a failure for 6 or so years now. I mean, in the midpoint of the Obama administration, he was talking about we need to pull out and withdraw our troops. And yet he became president, and now here he is with more troops in Afghanistan nearing the end of his first term than Obama had at the end of his second. And while at least he didn't do something stupid like surge 100,000 Americans into that country, he agreed to extend the war and has gotten 16 American soldiers, I believe this year alone, killed in that country where, they don't need to be. I guess one thing about the Afghan war and, trying to think back about it growing up is after 2003, you really didn't hear about it again until 2009. And that was because of the Iraq war. And it was very interesting that really as soon as, the Taliban were defeated in Afghanistan, and that didn't take very long because they really, I guess, weren't much of a government and didn't certainly have any kind of army that could oppose anything near the might of the U.S. military. But the U.S. and, the neocons in the Bush White House immediately turned their focus on Iraq in 2003. I remember the rumors that in all the fear mongering from the warmongers that it was Saddam Hussein was going to develop a nuclear weapon and give it to Osama bin Laden. Did you remember hearing this one?
No, I was busy playing Legos or something, dude. I don't, but I mean, it's not surprising at this point.
Yeah, no, I definitely remember that one. There were a couple, more great gems in there about how Saddam Hussein was secretly going to attack or endanger Americans. I remember the anthrax scare and, people being afraid to open their mail and stuff like that. But, we got the Iraq war, and what a disaster that has been. 1 million people dead over the course of that thing. We changed, the capital of Baghdad from, a split, Sunni Shia city to, now a Shia city, and in turn changed, the southern half of Iraq and the capital of Baghdad, so the central government, into a Shia government, and really changed the whole dynamics of the Middle East. I don't know if you have a few things, Phil, you want to talk about, either consequences of the Iraq war or just any kind of, particular lies that stand out to you about how we were tricked into it.
Yeah, well, the consequences of the Iraq war just empowers U.S. Bad guy number one, which is Iran, and jokes on the neocons for listening to Chalby that if we take out Saddam, then we're going to be kissing your feet forever, and we're going to have this happy-go-lucky relationship, and you're going to be backing up Israel, and it's going to be a happy time. So this will make it just a lot better for American influence in that greater area. And, of course, it turns out that's not what the hell happened, Kyle. What happened is pretty much the redirection. We're making up for that mistake, and that's what's caused all this failed regime change, because, you can't really call Libya successful regime change if the result is ultimately ISIS. And, having an Islamic state, which it actually became an Islamic state, like the size of the UK. If you have that going on in Syria, then of course that's going to bolster up America's enemies, Iran and Russia, to come and pretty much clean up the mess that you left there. That mess being ISIS. And then, of course, fighting back and forth is going to create more blowback and more insurgencies, and that's where you have Iraq War 3 or 3.5 or, whatever people are calling it these days. So, yeah, this is the neocons' own damn fault. I don't know if it was half stupidity that they actually meant well, or if this is kind of the evil, meticulously planned clean break strategy as they wanted to cause, like have every country surrounding Israel being this melting pot of chaos, so it would just be easier for them to take advantage of the region and please their Saudi warlords. But obviously that's not the case, and once again, you can't forget Big Bad Iran and blaming them for anything at all that happens, or their proxies for it, when at the end of the day, you and I both know that they're not a threat. They don't have nuclear capabilities, or what little they do, it's nothing. I mean, their economy is complete crap. They're having to buy a spoiled fruit, and they don't have the technology there to create a bomb, okay? And if any stockpiling happens, it's because we enable it to happen, because they can't export it because of the sanctions. And not just the sanctions, but the secondary sanctions. So not only is Iran in the crapper, so is every other country that wants to trade with them. And this is exactly why interventionism, domestically and internationally, doesn't progress a nation or any nation to move forward. And yeah, this is basically a mess that was created by us in the first place. And this goes back, decades before we can start all the way back from when we overthrew most of DEC in 1953. I don't think we had the time or really the patience to really dish that up today. But in the long run, Iraq was a failure. I mean, we have experts that say it's a failure, both on the left and the right. So, God forbid someone's actually serious about starting a war with Iran. I don't think that they would go to that extent. I mean, you had people send letters or wires down from the Pentagon to Trump like, hey, man, this is a pretty stupid idea. And I think maybe Trump was like half sincere about, hey, man, I don't want to kill like 120 so Iranians, just innocents over there. But it's a crap show, I'll say. So yeah, let's not have another Iraq, because if you think that we could overthrow Saddam, that went swimmingly with Iraq, good luck with Iran, buddy.
Right. Well, and I mean, the important thing I want to get across on today's show was just how much of this, was a result of the, fear kicked up after the 9/11 terror attacks. And, of course, just to assess how poorly it's gone for, the goal of the American people at the time. I think if you asked anybody on, 9/12 or, as they're passing the Afghan war resolution, the 2001 AUMF, or, the start of the Iraq war, what do they want? They want to be more safe. Well, everything we've done has done the opposite. And I think,
and not just with, if I can interrupt, not just them, but the war comes back home, whether it's military grade equipment, which military grade is an oxymoron, not an oxymoron, but it's crap. But, you're giving cops tanks, the wiretapping, the security at the airports. I mean, all this crap comes back home to us. Less I get into, the inflation that occurs. And again, it's just because we're the cash cows funding this thing. So not only are we creating this turmoil in other countries, but it comes back to us, but it's just hidden. And why Ron Paul goes on about the Fed, the Fed is one of the main agents that is causing all this evil. That's what it is, evil to happen. So I think it's really important that one of the reasons why I voted in the past at all or got politically involved or interested is because, you got to hit the people where it hurts most, and that's kind of their pocketbooks. And if people every day realize that they're actually funding this chaos, then they might reconsider.
Yeah, and I'll just add, especially with the war come home, I read an interesting article that ICE, Immigration Enforcement, accidentally didn't redact a portion of their memo, and it has been revealed that they are building a hyper-realistic urban warfare training center at some U.S. Army base. So, that's immigration enforcement. That's, the legacy of 9/11. It's kind of perfect that gets leaked, 18 years to the day after, as just a reminder of what's happened to our rights at the time, where I think especially the right would have been horrified by that back then, whereas now the, right is constantly cheering on immigration enforcement, all the terrible things that have happened.
And they're also wanting to take people's guns. That's right, right-wingers. They want to take your guns too. Anyone who's a right-winger that's listening. Your right-winger leader friends, they don't really care. Because at the end of the day, as a libertarian, the right and the left are just two stupid wings of the same evil, dumb bird. But to really consolidate this, these fear-mongering tactics that they use as propaganda are really to just scare us and have us relinquish all the freedom and liberty and privilege that we have. And we're going to keep seeing that.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening to the show. This, again, is a re-recorded piece because apparently my audio stopped recording right here at the end. But basically, I just plugged a couple things on the show, told everybody to go to the libertarianinstitute.org to see the work that me and Phil are doing there. And then just said, plug your show and talk about what you want. So here is Phil talking about all the great work that he's doing.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. It was great coming on. Yeah, if you want to keep up with me and what I'm doing, find me on Twitter. I am Mr. Pseu at Mr. Pseu, and then my name in parentheses is Phil Gibson. But I'm the host of the podcast A Boy Named Pseu. Like the Johnny Cash song, it is spelled Pseu. That's because I was formerly the pseudolectual podcast with Mr. Pseu, and you can kind of do the mental math and understand why I changed it, because people were even adding letters into the spelling when they were searching it. So keeping it simple as I can. I'm a boy named Pseu. That's the name of the podcast. A boy named Pseu, ABNP. I'm Mr. Pseu at Mr. Pseu on Twitter. A boy named Pseu Facebook page. And I blog as Mr. Pseu at the new libertarian blog run by Sally Mayweather, Sal the Agorist. And yeah, I'm an editor at the Libertarian Institute. So all the articles, you'll see most of them at least, that's published by me. If you have any ideas for submissions, send them on over, man. I think it's just Scott at scotthorton.org is where you submit it. I could be wrong on that. But yeah, man, we need content. We need more liberty lovers to just spread the message, not just anti-war stuff, but economics, philosophy, stuff on cops, drug legalization, whatever, anything liberty based, because I'm pro people and I'm pro liberty and a pro free society. You write stuff about crypto, send that too. And yeah, also just read the Libertarian Institute. And if you are just kind of lost in anything foreign policy wise, first of all, you came to the right place listening to this show, because as I mentioned at the beginning, without this show, or here, let me rephrase that. With this show, I'm much more informed on what everything that goes on in the world. Seeing a bunch of content and posting it articles wise does help as well as listening to Scott. But yeah, keep listening to this show. Kyle's the man. So is Will Porter. And all the people younger in our age category just being in the liberty movement. So keep up with them. And also read antiwar.com. The great Jason Ditz does a fabulous job just consolidating little liberty nuggets of foreign policy in like paragraphs that are 2-3 lines and everything you need to know for the day in 5 different countries. So yeah, just I know it can be a chore sometimes, but it's really rewarding when you actually understand what's going on in the world. And yeah, that's my spiel. Again, I'm Mr. Pseu at Mr. Pseu, aka Phil Gibson. Listen to A Boy Named Pseu podcast, subscribe, and yeah, thanks for listening to me rant and rave, and thank you, Kyle, for having me on.